Hello and welcome once again to the official Cubase YouTube channel, and thanks for joining me for this fourth and final video in this series on writing lo-fi hip-hop. My name is Stevie B, and it's been a real pleasure to share my knowledge with you on this subject. In the previous 3 videos, we've used some of the many virtual instruments, samples, and features that Cubase has to offer, and you've watched me turn a simple loop into a finished track. In this video, I'm going to mix and master our track and get it ready to release out into the world. So let's get to work. So a few quick things to note before we start mixing. You'll see that I've created 4 group tracks here at the bottom of our session. I've grouped our keys, drums, one-shot textures, and vocals. General philosophy when it comes to mixing is that I try to keep things volume balanced between different instrument groups as I work on the track. So throughout the last few videos, you saw me make the occasional adjustment if things were feeling too loud or too quiet. So by the time I get to the mixing phase, everything is like in the ballpark in terms of the balance. That's always the objective as I work. In terms of processing, my approach in general is to get away from doing things like adding lots of plugins on individual tracks. Most of the processing will be done at the group level, but there will be a few exceptions to that. Everything here is pretty much the same as we left it from the last video, although I did add a sneaky melody part throughout this pre-chorus section. I felt like this whole pre-chorus section felt a bit lonely, and that was the last of the finishing touches. So the question is always like where to start when you're mixing your track. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. I tend to focus on the drums initially, and in this case, I'll probably do some work to the drums group and make sure that it's feeling good with the keys group. I think that's a good place to start here. So these drums sound great. The only thing I'm going to do here is just add a bit of reverb to the snare, and I'm going to bring our mix way down. Just want a little tail on that snare. That sounds pretty cool. Soloing the drums group. I'd like to draw some air out of the drum kit, so I'm going to add an EQ to this drum bus. Not a big boost, just subtle. And I'm also going to throw a tube compressor on the drum bus for the sake of gluing it together and adding a bit of character. I don't want to overcompress this. It's really, really easy to overcook it. Probably less than 4 dBs of compression, and we're going to be using this in parallel, meaning the mix isn't going to be 100%. Okay, I got a high ratio dialed in here. Character at 100%. The mix is at 100% right now for listening back, and I'm just compressing a little underneath 4 decibels here. So adding a bit of punch and grit to the drum bus. Ultimately, it's a little too much, but again, I'm going to draw the mix back to probably somewhere around 50%. So we got some dry signal in there as well. I'm just going to solo the bass, and I might add a bit of saturation to this bass using quadrifuzz. Let's boost up our low mids here. And I'll draw the mix back to about 80% and boosting the lows a couple dBs as well. Cool, drums and bass sound pretty good together. Let's focus in on our keys group. So the keys already sound great. I'm not gonna mess with them too much, but I might add some quadrifuzz to it as well and just saturate them so we're getting that nice lo-fi warmth. So again, just boosting the drive on the low mids here. Let's take the volume down and draw the mix back a bit. I love using the tape setting on the quadrifuzz. That's perfect warm saturation. It suits the keys really nicely. I'm also going to use the EQ on this keys group at around the 3.5 kilohertz range just to draw some air out. And I'm just going to dip ever so slightly at around 900 hertz. Just to give you a before and after here, this is without the EQ. And with. Very, very subtle, but just helps them shine a bit. Next thing I'm going to focus on is like these one shots. So we'll take these bits and pieces that we've plucked out of our loops. I'm going to add a bit of reverb to them I'm going to do the same thing for these vocals too. So coming down to our one-shot textures group here at the bottom, let's solo this. And I'm just going to add a regular compressor to this group to glue them together. Again, you don't want to overcook it, just a bit. I'm going to throw some revelation on this group. I got the reverb mix at 100% for these one-shots. Really want them to sound super spacious and ambient. I'm really kind of pushing them to the background here. And that's something when you're mixing that you really have to constantly reevaluate. It's like, what are your foreground and what are your background elements and everything in between? A very common issue in mixing is everything being as loud as everything else. There has to be some contrast between what you choose to feature up front. In this case, I kind of want to feature the keys and the melodic aspect of the track, but there's a lot of textural and like ambient stuff happening that's playing more of a supportive role. Okay, coming to our breakdown section, I'm going to add a little reverb to our celesta, and I'm going to bring the volume down a bit. This is how it sounds. The Retrolog Big Wave patch sounds great, but I'm just going to dip some low mids from it so it's not fighting with our keys too much, and I'll boost it around 1.5 kilohertz. Just slightly, also dipping at around 500 hertz. So listen to before and after here. Before has a cool like muffled sound to it, but I think it's just going to end up fighting with our keys group too much. So this is with processing. And that instantly makes it sit better with the keys group. Check this out. Okay, same approach with the vocal group, just adding a bit of compression. We can make it sound super ambient by messing with the main time here. And let's just drastically cut out all the lows and the low mids from this vocal. I might take the same approach with these vocals and just kind of have them serve as like background elements. Just listening. So really, really vibey. And by doing that, I'm allowing the celesta and the keys to really kind of step forward in the mix and do most of the talking. So you've likely noticed that I'm using a lot of separate instances of reverb. And you might be wondering, well, why not set up like an auxiliary reverb and just push different elements into it? Then totally nothing wrong with doing that. I just like to have very specific control over the parameters of each reverb plugin that I set up, whether it be on a group track or an individual track. One thing I'd like to do here is dial in a bit of sidechain compression for some of our ambient stuff. So let's start with the rain texture. I'm putting a compressor on this rain ambience, and I'm going to add a sidechain source, which is going to be our kick. Let's engage the sidechain, and let's bring our threshold down and check out how this sounds. So this is a really easy way to kind of add a bit of movement to this texture, but also to carve out a little more room for the kick to breathe in the mix. And we can mess around with the release to figure out how quickly we want the rain texture to recover once those kicks hit. Something around 475 milliseconds sounds pretty good. And we can apply the same thing to some of the other ambient elements in our mix. For example, this pad shop might work well for that. You got to be a bit careful with sidechain compression because it's really easy to overdo it. Like if we listen to our mix here, the effect is probably a bit too overcooked for our rain ambience. So I'm going to push up the dry mix here. So we're kind of splitting the difference on the effect, and I'm going to turn it down. And we got to find the right volume for this. And how loud you want this type of texture in the mix is very subjective. Sometimes I hear lo-fi tracks where it's very loud. In this case, I think I'd like something a bit more subtle, maybe something around here. Okay, let's come to the stereo out channel here on our mixer. I'm going to add an EQ. I'm going to dip our low mids very slightly. I don't want to make drastic moves on this EQ. I'm going to boost around 3 kilohertz. And we want to make sure we activate the linear phase processing when we're using EQ on the stereo out channel here. I'm also going to add a vintage compressor. Let's set a ratio of 4:1. I'm going to set a medium attack and a fast release. And again, we'll just aim for a few decibels of compression. Just want to glue things together. I'm going to bring the wet dry mix to about 67% and check out how this kind of glues everything together here. It sounds so cool. I might pan these 2 vocal shots away from each other just slightly, and we could do the same thing with our 1 shots, just playing around with the stereo field. Okay, I'm going to boost the output on the vintage compressor here on our stereo out. We still have a lot of headroom to play with, and also got a brick wall limiter on the stereo out channel here, setting the threshold at -3. And using the supervision plugin here, I can accurately measure my loudness, coming in somewhere around -12 and 13 LUFS, which is great. One last thing I want to do here is just gradually fade out the volume of this rain ambience. So we can just draw in some volume automation here. Let's just dip that to 0. And I want that last piano chord to hang a bit longer. And we can draw some volume automation for that last chord as well, so we're dipping it out. And similarly, coming into the track, we could fade the volume in for our rain. Let's do that. One other little fun lo-fi plugin that we can use to add a bit of vinyl crackle is the grungelizer. Just making sure to dial out this hum here. And if you want, you got options with noise and distortion. I'm just adding a bit of crackle into the mix, very, very subtle. All right, I'm going to give the mix one last listen through here, make sure everything's all good. Well, my friends, I just want to say that it's been a real pleasure to share this whole process with you, and I want to thank Cubase for giving me this opportunity. I really hope that this series has inspired you to create some lo-fi hip-hop yourself, and let's be honest, it's easy to get stuck in a rut every now and then. Once in a while, it really helps to see how other producers work and put ideas together, so I sincerely hope that this series has been helpful for you. It's certainly been fun for me. So I'll leave it there. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and check out all of the other amazing content here. There's plenty of great stuff. In the meantime, I'm wishing you all happy composing. See you next time.